I'm a pilot for a reputed cargo airline in the US. I've had the most bizarre experience of my flying career and I don't know what to do. It was a normal day in Florida. I had checked my laptop for the flight schedule. I had to go from Miami to Puerto Rico and back. That sounded like great news to me. I could come home on the same day at least. My co-pilot for the flight was a guy named Jim. I immediately took to him during our pre-flight briefings and we stepped into our retrofitted Boeing 737. The first leg of the flight was normal with no turbulence, except for the air traffic control diverting us over Cuba to avoid a bit of stormy-looking clouds over the ocean. We missed the Bermuda Triangle, announced Jim looking at his digital map. "Well, you believe in those fairy tales?" I asked him. I had flown the route a couple of times before and had never noticed anything different about the so-called Bermuda Triangle. It was probably a hoax by some adults living in their parents' basement seeking attention. "Oh, it's real, all right," said Jim seriously. "Why do you think we were diverted over Cuba?" I chuckled. "Diversions happen all the time, Jim. A storm cloud is nothing paranormal." There was no time to discuss this further as we had to prepare for landing. We landed safely, the crew reloaded the plane and the ground crew started to refuel the aircraft. One of the mechanics came up to me with a frown on his face. Captain, there seems to be a slight issue." "A slight issue, huh?" "Yes, Captain. It looks like a fuel leak in one of the lines." I sighed. Company policy on suspected fuel leaks was to perform an inspection and ground the aircraft, and who knows how long that would take. I called the dispatcher back home, and after consulting with the engineering team, they gave the green light to perform the inspection. And Jim and I had a bit of lunch in the airport, and I was reading some stuff on my phone in the crew room to pass the time. Long story short, after about 6 hours, the mechanics told us that the plane was airworthy once again, and that we could fly back. Heck, at least no passengers were complaining to the management. It was evening and darkness had started to fall. I was a bit happy as the late flight home meant that my flight tomorrow would be rescheduled. This time though, we were flying right over the Bermuda Triangle, and Jim wasn't happy about it. I just have this eerie sensation. Every time I fly over this, it looks so creepy in the dark. It's because of the endless ocean. It does look pitch dark outside. I joked, and that's where things started to go sideways. There was a jolt and the aircraft shook. I frowned. That's some strong wind." Jim looked scared. "I don't know, Captain, that didn't feel natural." At once, the 737 started to shake uncontrollably, and my heart leapt into my mouth as the aircraft had started to lose altitude. At night, you can't see a thing out of the windshield and over the ocean. It's impossible to gauge your height. Naturally, I started to scan the instruments for any indication of defects. Maybe the engineers had done something wrong. "What is going on?" asked Jim. I grabbed the yoke and tried to force the nose up. "Power back, Jim." Jim pulled the throttle back and I held the yoke with an iron grip. After a terrifying 2 minutes, the aircraft leveled out and both of us breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe the storm cloud earlier had caused an air pocket, and it was our bad luck to stumble on it. "Oh crap," said Jim, looking out the window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. At night, the white cloud cover that you normally see when flying isn't that visible and depends on the moon. But what I saw defied all explanation. The clouds below us were forming a vortex and were blood red. To my horror, the aircraft started to shudder and the clouds started spinning. I think Jim wet himself as we were being sucked in. The nose tipped towards the swirling vortex that looked like it was a portal to hell. I frantically tried to control the plane, but it was like something else had taken over. The controls were unresponsive, and we were going down fast. Jim and I exchanged a horrified look. We knew that this was it. We were going to crash. Was this how so many countless deaths were caused? An anomaly in the weather that not even our brainiest scientists could figure out. But then something even more bizarre happened. The vortex had seemed to spit us out, and we were flying in a completely different place. It was like we had been transported to another dimension. The sky was darker and the clouds were black and red, and the air was filled with an ominous silence. I couldn't understand what was going on. Scientifically, I rejected the theory of alternate dimensions, but a horrible feeling grew in my chest. Was it real after all? What gave me the creeps even more was the land below us. It looked like the surface of Mars. What the heck just happened? Jim asked, visibly shaken. I don't know, but I think we need to get out of here fast, I replied. I tried to turn the plane around, but the controls were still unresponsive. We were trapped in this otherworldly place with no way out. To make it worse, our navigation system wasn't showing us anything and it was blank. I tried to place a call using our plane's satellite calling system, but it wouldn't connect. Yeah, we were screwed. And that's when things started to get even stranger. I saw something moving outside of the window, something that should not exist. My brain couldn't understand what it was seeing. It was like a shadow, but it had a form at the same time, and it was coming closer and closer. A gray mist started to envelop the aircraft. It was almost as if we were flying into a cloud, only the clouds here were black and red. Jim, do you see that? I asked, my voice shaking. He looked out the window and his eyes widened in terror. Yeah, what is that? The shadowy figure was now just inches away from the plane. It was like it was trying to get inside. I could feel the cold breeze coming through the window, even though the plane was still flying. It was dark and gray and didn't have a proper shape, but it reminded me of the Grim Reaper that you see in some storybooks. Cold drops of sweat formed on my forehead as the entity, or whatever that thing was, formed a long finger with a pointed claw and tapped on the window. We both screamed in terror as the figure suddenly disappeared. But then we heard a voice that sounded like it was coming from inside of the plane. I've been waiting for you. Jim and I looked at each other, both of us paralyzed with fear. Who's there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my bravado gone. No one answered, but we could feel the presence in the cockpit, a presence that was not human. The already cold cockpit got colder and I was paralyzed in fear, too scared to turn around. I saw a gray mist fill the cockpit, and that was the last thing that I remember before blacking out. When I came to, we were back on Earth and flying over the place where we had encountered the portal or whatever that vortex had been. The rest of the journey was in silence, and I have no idea how Jim and I managed to land that aircraft safely. Jim handed in his resignation on the same day, but I decided to stay. We recalled the event perfectly, but decided to not mention it to anyone. I like my job and I don't want to be sent to the therapist, or even worse, have my license revoked. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel of my Ford pickup in fear, not daring to look behind me. I stopped at a fast food joint and ate in the pickup itself. Once I went home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I had lived alone for the majority of my life, and I had never experienced this feeling before. I went to bed immediately after a shower, but I couldn't make myself fall asleep. After an hour of tossing and turning, I managed to sleep, but my dreams were plagued by the shadowy entity who laughed in my face about not believing in the supernatural, and how I would have to pay penance for it. I dreamt that I was trapped in the other dimension and that I had no escape. I woke up, my pillows soaked in sweat despite the air conditioning. I tried to call Jim, only to realize that I didn't have his number. I ate some cornflakes, wondering whom to call. scrolling through my contacts, and then it hit me. I would call Jackson. Jackson was an investigator in the National Transportation Safety Board, and I had met the guy earlier in the airport. He was a loner like me, and we had hung out a couple of times, watching the latest Marvel movies. He wouldn't think that I was slowly going insane anyway, so I called him. Jackson, a guy who was usually light, became serious and told me to stay where I was and to not leave the house. He promised to be there within 2 hours with his team. I heaved a sigh of relief and finished the last of my coffee and realized that my laptop was in my room. I wanted to check if the company had changed my flight. There was no way that I wanted to fly today until Jackson had sorted this mess out. I went into my room and the door slammed closed behind me. An icy feeling settled in my veins as I looked around. None of the windows were open, so it couldn't have been the wind. I crept forward only to stop in my tracks as a gray mist formed in my room, the same gray mist that formed outside our aircraft. I stood paralyzed in fear as a shape started to form out of the gray mist, the shape that formed outside our aircraft yesterday. I stood paralyzed as the thing shot what looked like chains made out of dark gray mist at me, and they wrapped around my ankles. The searing pain jolted me into my senses as I yanked my feet out of its clutches. I screamed and turned open the door, hoping that it wasn't locked, and thankfully it opened. I closed the door behind me as the thing slammed against it, letting out a guttural howl. I fumbled for my keys, ran into the garage, and climbed into my pickup. I pulled out onto the driveway and stared at my house. Had that thing followed me back from yesterday? If so, maybe it had gotten to Jim as well. My ankles weren't faring any better. They looked like they had gotten burned, and the skin was red and bruised where the chains had touched me. In hindsight, I should have gotten an ice pack from my fridge. I got on the internet and was searching for forums where people have had similar experiences, and I stumbled across this one. Maybe you guys can help me out until Jackson comes. I'm too scared to go back inside. That thing didn't look like it wanted to chat. First of all, thank you all so much for your advice. You have no idea how comforting it was to me to sit in that pickup reading all your advice instead of driving myself crazy. My ankle was killing me, so I decided to take a bottle of water that I had stored in my pickup and wet a cloth that I found inside. I wrapped it over my ankle, and that gave me a bit of relief. I contemplated it driving away many times, but I always seemed rooted to the spot, my hands refusing to start my pickup. Anyway, after many tense hours of waiting, I finally spotted Jackson's car pull into the driveway, followed by another official-looking Cadillac. Jackson exited the car along with his team, who were carrying a duffel bag. I got out of my pickup and I shook his hand. "Thanks for coming all the way out here, man," I said, pumping his hand up and down. Jackson nodded towards the two men who were getting out of the Cadillac, and they were quite obviously someone from the government, complete with black suits, ties, and sunglasses. One of the guys had a thick mustache, while the other one looked as if he was devoid of any emotion. What a shocker. They stood, waiting for Jackson to do the introductions. "Right, so guys, this is Chris. Chris, these are my two colleagues from the government." "Let me guess," I said, feeling a bit bolder. "FBI." "I can neither confirm nor deny that statement," said the guy with the mustache. "Anyway, I'm Daniel and the other guy's John." "Yeah, right, like those were the real names anyway." "I'm assuming Jackson would have told you everything," I said, gesturing to my house, which Jackson's team were now taking photos of. Daniel nodded. He did. "So, do you deal with these types of, things?" I asked him. The reply was the usual. "I can neither confirm nor deny that statement." "I can make a coffee if you come in," I said, looking at Jackson, who shook his head. "No, Chris, you can't go back inside until we have a look." "All right," I said. I need to see if I have been rescheduled from my roster. Don't worry, said John, speaking for the first time. We have spoken to your airline captain. An icy finger trailed along my spine. What had these bozos from the government told the airline? Luckily, Jackson saw the look on my face. Don't worry, Chris. We told them that you're doing some work for us. I breathed a sigh of relief. Any news about Jim, the co-pilot? Jim has left the state, said Daniel, shaking his head. We have him under observation as well. Will whatever you guys are doing take long? I asked. I didn't want to stay in my driveway and announce to the entire neighborhood that something was up with my house. Jackson looked gloom. We need to take some energy readings here. I think you should go and book yourself a hotel for today. I sighed. Can I at least pack? The suits shook their heads at once. No, Captain, leave everything as it is. After a final handshake, I got into my pickup and went to the town, searching for a hotel to spend the day in. I had some lunch from a restaurant and checked into a newly built 3-star. The room was okay, but as I surveyed the room, I had an unsettling feeling. Don't get me wrong, one of the perks of being an airline pilot is that we get to stay in amazing hotels, but I never experienced this feeling that made the hair on the back of my head stand up. It was as if I were not alone. I shrugged it off and I opened up the curtains. I had no illusions. I was technically trapped here until the G-men told me everything was okay. Jackson had given me a device that he told me to use in an emergency, whatever that meant. I looked at the phone-like device that looked very much like an old Nokia. Maybe I was supposed to press the green call button and the phone would do its magic. Luckily, my phone had full charge, so I closed the curtains, hopped into the comfy bed, and decided to watch something on Netflix to pass the time. I nearly dropped the phone as I opened up the app, to be greeted by a picture of a woman smiling like a maniac. I browsed through the movie collection, only to be greeted by horror movie after horror movie. I threw the phone across the pillow and decided to go to sleep. As my head hit the pillow, I was greeted by that thing. It covered me with its shadowy presence and laughed in my face as I struggled to escape that dimension. I tried my best to at least see what it looked like, but the only thing I could see were the eyes. The eyes that glowed like they were burning coal. I tried to wake myself up, and just as I had that thought, the entity smiled. Or at least I thought that it had smiled. I woke up suddenly, sweating profusely, and tried to move my hand to wipe my forehead, when to my horror, my hands would not move. I tried to move my legs, but it seemed like they were made out of lead. My heart leapt out of my chest as I looked at myself and saw that my entire body was covered with gray smoke, only it didn't feel like smoke, more like if lead were a heavy liquid. Something told me to look at the armchair and let out a whimper of fear. Sitting on it was the thing itself, and this time I saw it properly for the first time. Its cloak was made of the same gray mist that covered me, and its face was the thing that puzzled me. The face didn't have a form, just the burning coal eyes and the mouth with dark gray lips. The thing smiled, revealing jagged, sharp teeth that didn't resemble anything human. "Chris," it moaned. The voice sounded like dragging nails on a chalkboard. I tried to cover my ears, only to be reminded that this thing had me in its power. My usually gruff voice came out like the squeak of a mouse. "What do you want?" I shuddered as the thing smiled, showing me even more of its teeth that looked like they were suspiciously covered in blood. "Can't you remember?" No, I'm sorry. I should have slept with that dang emergency phone near me. This thing was going to give me a heart attack soon. "Oh, that's too bad." I won't lie, I nearly wet myself as the thing got up from the armchair in the room and came near me. But something was happening to its face. It was changing into the face of... "Kate? Open up!" yelled a voice from outside of the room. "NTSB officials, open up." The thing hissed and then vanished, taking the gray smoke with it. The door unlocked, and thank God for the hotels these days having emergency overrides, and Jackson walked in looking anxious. "What happened?" he asked me, and I sat up and looked at him. "It came again." He looked at me sheepishly. "Sorry, Chris, that device I gave you to contact me is designed to send a remote alert to us when it detects strange energy, and we keyed it to the anomaly that we found in your house." "Speaking of that," I said, opening a soft drink that I found in the minibar. "What did you guys find anyway?" "There's an energy fluctuation in your house, mainly your bedroom, but I want to know more about this entity that visited you today." I told Jackson the entire story and he nodded. "God, my mistake. I think it's attached itself to something that you took on that flight." "Dude," I stared at him, "that could even be my house keys or the keys to my truck." "Yeah, that's the thing. Jackson, that thing, it looked a bit like Kate." Jackson paled. I knew that I had him, but before that, let me tell you about Kate. Kate was an absolute goddess of a woman that I met when I had just started working for the airline. She was a pilot herself and worked for a charter airline. I saw her in the airport restaurant and I was immediately in love. I approached her a bit shyly and asked her out, and to my great surprise, it worked. We started meeting up for a few coffees and we decided to date. I loved her a lot, and I knew that she would be the perfect woman for me and I the perfect man for her. Well, that was until she had vanished. I don't need to tell you how devastated I was. I had never had a successful relationship in high school or college, one that lasted for a long time anyway, and to see Kate disappear off the face of the earth, well, it was heartbreaking. I went to the police, but apparently, a boyfriend reporting an adult missing isn't enough. She's an adult, they said. Her employer had no clue about her disappearance and was concerned. The police agreed to put an alert, but nothing came of it after both of us got involved. Months turned into years, and so did my hope. "Jackson," I said a bit more forcefully. He turned to the window. "You're going to hate me after this." The doorbell rang and in came John. He put a hand on Jackson. John had been listening in on our conversation. Typical government. 12 years ago, the NTSB was alerted to a missing aircraft over the Bermuda Triangle. I gripped my armchair tightly. The pilot of that aircraft was Kate. I looked at Jackson. "You covered it up. You've been covering up every single disappearance in the triangle, haven't you?" I saw red. I stood up, as if that would do any good, but I was brought back to earth by Jackson. "Help us then." "What?" John cleared his throat. "Help us, Captain. Join us to find Kate and solve the mystery once and for all." Of course I agreed. The unnamed agency spoke to my airline, who put me on paid leave and told me not to bring anything with me, including my clothes. My pickup key, house key, and tack, even glasses would stay behind. It would only be me. Yeah, this included my phone and laptop. The agency, whoever they were, paid my hotel bill, gave me some new clothes, and even got me some new glasses. They even bought me a new phone, and not a crappy one at that. I'm still in the hotel currently, and I'll be leaving shortly. Jackson and his team don't want to take the risk of flying, so it's 8 hours over land. I'm going to fall asleep on the way. It's almost 7 o'clock here anyway. I haven't seen even a slight sign of the thing since Jackson and them had left. That was a good sign, right? But only if I knew how wrong I was. I reached into my wallet to take out my credit cards. Yeah, Jackson wanted those as well. His instructions were to cancel them and get new ones posted to some weird-looking address. I had effectively given up all my worldly possessions to this unnamed agency. My fingers brushed against a talisman, an object that brought tears to my eyes. Kate had given me it a long time ago, saying that her mom considered it good luck, and to those of you who want to know, I hadn't met her parents yet. She was planning on introducing me to them later, well, until she disappeared. Anyway, as I took out the talisman, I felt a searing pain in my hand, almost as if it were on fire. I clutched my hand and I dropped the thing on the floor, where the gray mist was leaking from it into the real world. In a panic, I quickly called Jackson. Daniel barged into my room. I was to have no privacy, it seemed, and the minute that he came in, the gray mist miraculously disappeared. Daniel nodded. I'm gonna stay in the room if you don't mind, and we'll take care of the talisman. Yeah, whatever, man, I need to wash my face a bit. I went into the washroom and a strong sense of foreboding greeted me. I stopped suddenly. Was that a gray mist leaking through the ventilation duct? I slowly turned towards the mirror and nearly shat myself. The thing was right behind me, smiling with an all-too-wide grin. I quickly grabbed the hairdryer. Yeah, I know, but that was the only thing that I could find to defend myself, but there was nobody there. What the heck? I looked in the mirror and to my utter disbelief, the thing appeared to be behind me in the reflection. Daniel, in here! Daniel rushed to the washroom, but predictably the thing smiled smugly and vanished. Daniel had a very unwelcome explanation. Sorry, Captain, the entity appears to be attached to something of yours. Is it the talisman? Daniel frowned. No, Captain, we can't say for sure, but I think it's something in this room. Can't you find out which it is? No, Captain, not until we test every single thing you took on that plane. Yeah, right, I can't even take a dump alone without that thing bothering me. Jackson agreed to move the timeline up and we leave in 10 minutes. I have a strong feeling the suits won't let me contact anyone once I'm inside their facility, so you won't be hearing from me for a while. I'm going to find out what happened to Kate, even if it means walking into hell myself. Jackson and his friends from the NTSB took me to an undisclosed facility in God knows where. I'm not joking, I spent the better part of the 7-hour journey napping, and guess what? That thing didn't plague me at all. I guess the theory of it being attached to something I took on that flight was true after all. Anyway, we arrived at the office of the NTSB. The security had a look at Jackson and the suit's IDs, and after giving me a one-over, my driver's license was under their custody anyways. They waved us through. Instead of going through the front door like normal people would, the crew went into a subterranean garage. They parked the Cadillac and we went into an elevator, and Jackson surprised me by inserting a card into a card reader. The lift knew where to go as it started to descend, and no, the digital display didn't indicate the floor numbers. I had a sneaking suspicion that we were going to a highly secretive facility that only a few people knew about, and I was proven right as the elevator doors opened. We piled into a dimly lit lobby and were greeted by a big made man. Welcome, Team Bravo, I see you've returned with our guest. Yes, boss, said Daniel. The boss smiled back at Jackson. Can't say I'm surprised. Congrats on the promotion, Jackson. Thank you, boss. And do forgive me, Captain, he said, looking at me. We were unable to shake anyone's hands as it can cause issues with the energy fluctuations. And you can call me boss. All right, boss, I said, trying to be a part of the team. The boss was satisfied with our answers and nodded at Jackson, who no doubt was the leader of Team Bravo. Jackson told us to follow him and went down a corridor that had several doors set into it. We opened one and were greeted by an apartment. Did I forget to mention that there were no windows by any chance? I guessed that we were underground. We, or rather the G-men, dumped their equipment on the floor and faced me. Jackson raised his hands. You might be having a lot of questions that we'll answer. Fine, I said. First of all, who are you guys? And Daniel was the one that answered. We are a division of the NTSB known as EDO, or the Extraordinary Divisions Organization, and we answer directly to the Pentagon. We research anomalies reported by anybody focusing on transportation. I turned to Jackson. Hold on, buddy, I'm pretty sure you were just an NTSB inspector last time that I checked. Jackson shrugged. And that was until I got promoted. Heck, that's why we didn't tell you anything until you signed the NDA. Yeah, well, I just broke it. John opened up the duffel bag and took out a pack of what looked like a computer monitor. Truth be told, Captain, we're very interested in the Bermuda Triangle, and this is the first time we've experienced anyone with, after effects. So what's the plan? I asked him sitting on the sofa. The G-man shrugged. We're on quarantine. We need to be in this decontamination chamber for a few hours until the boss man briefs us. Wow, I was stuck with these guys for another couple of hours. Jackson assured me that his old team was taking care of the belongings that I had left behind, and that I would only have to ask to get something provided to me. This was early in the morning, so I decided to take a nap. The apartment had 2 rooms, and I decided to bunk with Jackson. I slept soundly without the thing disturbing my peace. We were called down for breakfast, and the boss informed us that we were to be present at 9:30 in the briefing room sharp. That was fine with me. 9:30 saw us in a normal conference room set up with a smartboard and a couple of chairs. The 4 of us, along with the boss, whose name no one knew, and a couple of people in what looked like military uniforms, were present at the briefing. The boss started to speak at first, his deep voice resonating in the small room. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are all aware by now, our primary focus is the Bermuda Triangle. The smartboard flickered to life, highlighting the area on the map. The pilot, Captain Chris, and his first officer Jim of Redacted Airlines experienced something that interests us greatly. Captain, why don't you explain what happened? I stood up and recounted the story, secretly hoping that nobody laughed at me or that I was secretly in a psych hospital. Everybody's faces, however, displayed either horror or shock. Jackson cleared his throat. For the record, everyone, Jim recounts no sightings of the entity except the initial encounter. We have concluded that the entity has anchored itself to a possession of the captains that he took on that flight. I raised my hand. Captain? Wait, you government types seriously believe this? The boss smiled and motioned a guy in a lab coat, a scientist, to speak to us. The scientist stood up and went to the podium. All right, folks, to answer your question, Captain, we believe in the laws of energy thoroughly. We have observed that there is a slight anomaly in the area of the Bermuda Triangle. In terms of this energy, when Jackson here reported your incident to his superiors, we were ordered to step in. We have found that the energy signature of your house is different to these surroundings, suggesting that something extraordinary is going on. So nothing paranormal? I asked him cautiously. The scientist smiled. I'm afraid not, Captain. It's all to do with the energy. Well, then what about the flight then? That place we went to? I asked him. Don't blame me, I came here to find answers. The scientist looked a bit less sure of himself. That is still under observation, to be honest. The boss motioned for the scientist to sit down and dominated the podium once again. What we are interested in is this entity that you spoke about, Captain. We have been observing the triangle for the past few years, and yet we haven't observed such energy spikes as we are now. We are testing your belongings for traces of residual energy, but it is still under progress. For the benefit of Team Bravo, said another military-type man, we managed to borrow a satellite that is recording every single thing that's going on in that area. We will keep observing the energy fluctuations and brief you once we're done. That's it, gentlemen. The briefing left me confused and tossing and turning in my bunk bed. Was there such a huge amount of energy that could create another world? I didn't buy it for a second. The science team had a breakthrough after 2 weeks. The higher-ups were pressing the boss. They needed the satellite back. I don't know how to explain this, he said, calling us to the office, but the talisman seems to have another energy signature emitting from it. Kate believed in it a lot. I said a bit angrily. She should have worn that thing when she went over the triangle the day she went missing. Maybe she would have survived. I pored over the NTSB records for the incident, by the way, and nothing on that 3-page folder told me anything useful, other than the time and day she had gone on the flight which I brought the attention of the boss. He surveyed the 4 of us. I want you, Team Bravo, to take up the challenge of finding out what goes on in the triangle. Our analysts have informed me that on the night of the full moon, at precisely 9:39 p.m., a sharp spike only for a fraction of a second at a particular point in the triangle occurs. Let me guess, boss, says Daniel. It coincided with the captain's flight path. The boss pointed his pen at Daniel. Attaboy. Sir, began John a bit fearfully. You're not suggesting that we fly into the triangle, are you? The boss grinned. But I am. Things escalated pretty fast from that point onward. The full moon was approaching in a week and we had to be prepared. Strangely enough, the talisman didn't burn me when I held it this time, leading Jackson to suggest that maybe something that I had in my wallet at the time was triggering it. The science team had several opinions that the triggers were the stuff that I kept in my wallet. Anyway, we exercised and geared up as the military team would say for that day as it loomed closer. The team would be the 4 of us, 3 grunts and the 2 pilots. The boss and the science team would run the ground ops from the base. Oh, and before you ask, no, I still had no idea where we were. I slept on the way mostly. I suspect the G-men might have spiked my coffee, but at least I got good free food here. On the day of departure, we loaded our backpacks, double-checked our communications equipment, and ran a bunch of last-minute checks. My jaw dropped when the boss led us to the hangar. We were to fly on one of the aircrafts in development, something that defied all explanation. It looked like an alien craft with its slim and sleek design. It looked like a cross between a plane and a helicopter, and I admired its stealthy-looking design. The boss was nervous. The Pentagon wasn't happy about loaning this bad boy. Try not to get a scratch on it, huh? The interior was exactly like the exterior of the aircraft. Plush leather seats that looked like they belonged on a luxury jet awaited us, and of course, me being me couldn't resist checking out the cockpit. Let's be very clear here, there are 2 types of pilots in their late 40s like me. Pilots who hate computerized modern pilot cockpits and prefer the old-style gauge-type systems. And the other ones who love the computerization and digital screens. That was me. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why on earth anyone would want to read off the gauges that took ages to find. Anyway, I was blown away by the sheer design of it all. Large digital displays surrounded the pilots, who had joysticks to control the aircraft. I gave the pilots the thumbs up and went to join the team. After a final comm check of our gear, we got the all clear to take off. The takeoff was extremely smooth, and once in the air, the pilot grinned at us. I don't know if anybody told you, but this baby can reach almost 3 times the speed of sound. So buckle up, gents, and we're flying at 40,000 feet to avoid the other aircraft. Wow, said Daniel, clapping his hands. We'll be there in no time then. I looked at the team. I had gotten to know them well during the 2 weeks, and Daniel was an outgoing guy. Jackson was, well, Jackson, but John spoke only when necessary, and that wasn't much. Anyways, once we had reached our cruising altitude, Jackson sent the grunts to the cockpit. There was something that he wanted to tell us, and only us. He indicated that we switch off our comms and said in a grave voice, I'm not buying that energy explanation for a second. There's something sinister going on there, and we needed to stop at all costs. Got it? He looked hard at me and I nodded. Roger. The other men followed, with John simply nodding. The NTSB had provided us with what they called energy blasters, which shot superheated plasma at anything that it encountered. I had a feeling that the aircraft was fitted with something equally frightening as well. And in case you were wondering, I, being a private citizen, was not allowed to carry the firearm, but I had the talisman with me. Something equally dangerous. I noticed a change in the pitch of the engines, and the pilots called over the intercom stating that we were a couple of miles away from insertion into the triangle. We buckled our seatbelts and waited for the inevitable. The aircraft jolted suddenly to the right, and we looked at each other in grim determination. This was it. I looked outside as the aircraft suddenly rightened itself. "Wow," said Jackson, looking mesmerized by the clouds starting to form a vortex, slowly spinning and gaining speed. I looked at my watch. It was 9:39. The aircraft started to shudder as the pilots engaged the corrective actions. In my defense, I didn't have the privilege of practicing this maneuver 1,000 times in the simulator when I did it. "What the heck is that?" shrieked one of the grunts. We looked outside, and sure enough, the portal to hell was forming once again. All the pilot said was, "Brace yourself, we're going in." The nose of the aircraft tipped towards the vortex as the engine screamed bloody murder. We shot like a bullet towards the vortex, and I closed my eyes. The shuddering stopped, and we were in the calm once again. Jackson was speechless. "The energy spike must be creating a rip in space-time. It looks like hell," said Daniel, shuddering. "Can you control this thing?" I asked the pilots, who looked gloomily at me. "The controls aren't responding anymore." "We've lost contact with ground," said a grunt who was updating everybody back at base. At once, the mist started to form outside the plane, and as discussed earlier, the pilots eased it onto the red, rocky soil. We waited in silence until the mist intensified and the temperature dropped rapidly. No one was ready for what happened next. Of course, the thing appeared inside the plane. The thing didn't care about the rifles that were aimed at it. It just smiled, showing off those pointy teeth. "Oh, you came back," it said. "State your purpose," commanded Jackson forcefully. The thing looked at him. "Chris shall remain here. I need him." "Where is Kate?" At the mention of the word, something happened to the thing. Its featureless face changed into the sweet face of Kate, with its burning coal eyes turning into her deep blue eyes. I was at a loss for words. "Kate," I said, almost running to hug her. Daniel held out an arm, stopping me. "Oh, Chris, darling," said Kate, tears starting to form in her eyes. "You need to leave, please. This entity will take you too." "I can't leave you," I whispered. "The talisman," said John's voice. I looked at the usually emotionless guy and was shocked to see his face. He looked sad and almost looked like he was fighting back tears. This was the first time that I had seen him express any sort of emotion. "Gimme," said Kate. I could see that she was fighting to control her human body. "This thing feeds off humans, Chris. Every soul who comes to this dimension is doomed. Please give me the talisman. Free us all." I handed her the talisman with shaking fingers and screamed a cry of agony as she plunged it into her chest. John fainted on the floor of the plane, surprising Daniel. There was a guttural roar as the dark gray mist poured out of Kate's chest and the thing appeared, its eyes burning with hate. But the talisman had done its job. The thing faded into oblivion, but not before giving me a parting souvenir. As it tried to grab a hold of me, a smoky tentacle wrapped around me that felt like lava on my skin. Unsurprisingly, we tried to figure out a way to get back into our dimension, until Jackson had noticed that the portal was open. The pilots used the vector thruster engines to turn us around, and we were back on Earth. Oh, and you want to know what that souvenir the thing gave me was, now don't you? I was proud of my skin, but contact with the thing in it had given me a grayish mark on my forearm, where the tentacle had made contact, almost like a brand. After getting debriefed and warned not to share my story with anyone, I wanted to find out what John's involvement was with this. I asked him just as he had dropped me off at my house. He looked at me like I was the dumbest person on earth. "Kate's my sister.